The Majority Leader.
Yesterday, the Senate confirmed a well-qualified jurist chosen by President Trump to serve on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Paul Mattei of New Jersey will bring a wealth of experience to the bench, and I was proud to support his nomination. We also voted to advance the nomination of Naomi Rao to the D.C. Circuit. This nominee is yet another of President's excellent choices to serve as a federal judge. Ms. Rao graduated with honors from Yale and the University of Chicago School of Law. Her record includes a distinguished tenure in academia, public and private sector legal experience, as well as a clerkship on the U.S. Supreme Court. Most importantly, in testimony before our colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, she demonstrated a commitment to maintaining the public trust and upholding the rule of law. So the committee favorably reported Ms. Rao's nomination, and soon the Senate will have an opportunity to continue fulfilling our advice and consent responsibilities by voting to confirm her to the federal bench. We'll also vote this afternoon on the nomination of William Beach, who's been waiting for over a year to take his post as Commissioner of Labor Statistics. Our colleagues on the Help Committee recommended Mr. Beach here to the floor in December of 2017. A full year later, with no progress, he was returned to the White House. Now he's finally getting a floor vote. This pointless obstruction needs to change, but I'm glad that we can at least confirm Mr. Beach this week. Now, Madam President, on another matter, the Senate will soon vote on a resolution under the War Powers Act. I strongly oppose this unnecessary and counterproductive resolution and would urge our colleagues to join me in opposing it. From the outset, let me say this. I believe it is right for senators to have grave concerns over some aspects of Saudi Arabia's behavior, particularly the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. That is not what this resolution is about, however. In December, the Senate voted on a resolution that addressed this situation's concern about Saudi Arabia. If senators continue to have concerns about Saudi behavior, they should raise them in hearings and directly with the administration and directly with Saudi officials, as I have done. And they should allow a vote on the confirmation of retired General John Abizaid, whose nomination to be U.S. Ambassador to Riyadh is being held up, once again, by Democratic obstruction. They should also allow a vote on the nomination of David Schenker to be Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. He's been held up here for nearly a year. If we want to solve problems in the Middle East through diplomacy, we'll need to confirm diplomats. Regarding Yemen, it's completely understandable that senators have concerns over the war, the American interests entangled in it, and its consequences for Yemeni civilians. I think there's bipartisan agreement shared by the administration that our objective should be to end this horrible conflict. But this resolution doesn't end the conflict. It will not help Saudi pilots avoid civilian casualties. It will not enhance America's diplomatic leverage. In fact, it will make it harder to achieve those very objectives. This is an inappropriate and counterproductive measure. First, the administration has already ended air-to-air refueling of coalition aircraft. We only provide limited non-combat support to UN-recognized Yemeni government and to the Saudi-led coalition. It certainly does not constitute hostilities. Second, there are real threats from the Houthis in Yemen, whom Iran, as we all know, is backing. Missiles and explosives are being aimed at civilians. Anti-ship missiles are being fired at vessels in key shipping lanes of global importance. If one of those missiles kills a large number of Saudi or Emirati civilians, let alone Americans who live in Riyadh or Dubai, say goodbye to any hope to a negotiated end to this conflict. These threats won't evaporate. They're not going to go away if the U.S. ends its limited support. So I think of the American citizens who live in the regions. Third, our focus should be on ending the war in Yemen responsibly. Pulling the plug on support to our partners only undermines the very leverage and influence that we need to help facilitate the UN's diplomatic efforts. The U.S. will be in a better position to encourage the Saudi-led coalition to take diplomatic risks if our partners trust that we appreciate the significant, legitimate threat they face from the Houthis. And fourth, we face real threats from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We need cooperation from Yemen, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia to defeat those terrorists. So we should think twice about undermining these very partners whose cooperation we obviously need for our own security. So here's my bottom line, Madam President. We should not use this specific vote on a specific policy decision as some proxy for all the Senate's broad feelings about foreign affairs. Concerns about Saudi human rights issues should be directly addressed with the administration and with Saudi officials. That's what I've chosen to do. That's what I'd recommend others do. But as for Yemen, we need to ask what action will actually serve our goal. That is, working with partners to encourage a negotiated solution. Would withdrawing our support facilitate efforts to end the war, or just embolden the Houthis? Would sending this signal enhance or weaken our leverage over the Saudi-led coalition? Would voting for this resolution strengthen the hand of the UN Special Envoy, Martin Griffiths, or in fact undermine his work? Would we prefer that Saudi Arabia and the UAE go to China and Russia for assistance instead of the United States? The answers to these questions are pretty clear. We need to vote no on this misguided resolution. Now, on one final matter, yesterday I continued the discussion we've been having about the strange ideas that seem to have taken a hold of Washington Democrats. Ideas like the Democrat Politician Protection Act, a scheme to limit America's First Amendment right to political speech and force taxpayers to subsidize political campaigns, including ones they disagree with. It did not earn a single Republican vote in the House, by the way, thank goodness. Ideas like Medicare for None, which could spend more than $32 trillion to hollow out seniors' health benefits and boot working families from their chosen plans into one-size-fits-all government schemes. But even the soaring costs and massive disruption that plan would cause American families are dwarfed, Madam President, dwarfed by the grandiose scheme they're marketing as the Green New Deal. By now, we're all familiar with the major thrust of the proposal: powering down the U.S. economy, and yet somehow also creating government-directed economic security for everyone at the same time. Naturally, accomplishing all this is quite a tall order. According to the Democrats' resolution, it will require overhauling every building in America to meet strict new codes, overseen, of course, by social planners here in Washington. It would require banning the production of American coal, oil, and natural gas in 10 short years, and cracking down on transportation systems that produce any emissions, which, as one hastily deleted background document made clear, is just a polite way of saying Democrats want to eventually ban anything with a motor that runs on gasoline. They want to ban anything with a motor that runs on gasoline. I thought abolish ICE was bad enough when Democrats were rallying to close down all of immigrations and customs enforcement. But now what do we get? The far left also wants to abolish the internal combustion engine. And somewhere around that time, Madam President, I gather, is when the miraculous promised universal job guarantee would kick in as well. Just a good old-fashioned state-planned economy. Garden variety, 20th century socialism. Garden variety, 20th century socialism. Our Democratic colleagues have taken all the debunked philosophies of the last 100 years, rolled them into one giant package, and thrown a little green paint on them to make them look new. But, Madam President, there's nothing remotely new about a proposal to centralize control over the economy and raise taxes on the American people to pay for it. Margaret Thatcher famously said the trouble with socialist governments is they always run out of other people's money. How often have we heard that? Well, this dangerous fantasy would burn through the American people's money before it even got off the launch pad. But the cost to the Treasury is just the beginning. It's hard to put a price tag on ripping away the jobs and livelihoods of literally millions of Americans. It's hard to put a price tag on forcibly remodeling America's homes, whether they want it or not, taking away their cars, whether they want that or not. And it certainly is difficult to put a price tag on unilaterally disarming the entire U.S. economy with this kind of self-inflicted wound while other nations like China go roaring by. By definition, global emissions are a global problem. Even if we grant the Democrats' unproven claim that cratering American industries and outlawing the energy sources that middle-class families can afford would produce the kind of emissions changes they are after, we need to remember that the United States is only responsible for about 15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Only 15% of the global total. And according to the Department of Energy, the U.S. cut our own energy-related carbon emissions by 14% from 2005 to 2017. So we've been cutting carbon emissions in this country significantly from 2005 to 2017. Well, Madam President, it's appropriate to ask, what did the rest of the world do? Well, they kept soaring higher and higher. In the same period that the U.S. cut our energy-related carbon emissions by 14%, the International Energy Agency found that worldwide energy-related carbon emissions rose by 20% everywhere else. China, the world's largest carbon emitter, increased their emissions dramatically over that period. So believe me, Madam President, if Democrats succeed at slowing the U.S. economy and cutting our prosperity because they think it will save the planet, China will not pull over by the side of the road to keep us company. They will go roaring right by us. So the proposal we're talking about is frankly delusional, absolutely delusional. It is so unserious that it ought to be beneath one of our two major political parties to line up behind it. The Washington Post editorial board, not exactly a bastion of conservatism, dismissed the notion that the country could reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as, quote, an impossible goal. In a clear sign of how rapidly Democrats are racing to the far left, President Obama's own energy secretary said the same thing, quote, I just cannot see how we could possibly go to zero carbon in a 10-year time frame. So, these Washington Democrats' leftward spin is leaving the Obama administration officials in the dust, and even parts of their own base. Listen to what Democrats' usual big labor allies have to say about this socialist nightmare. Union leaders with the AFL-CIO say this proposal, quote, could cause immediate harm to millions, this is the AFL-CIO, millions of our members and their families. Immediate harm, Madam President, for American workers, American farmers, families, and America's future, and nowhere near enough reduction in global emissions to show for it. A self-inflicted wound for the low price, by one estimate, of somewhere in the neighborhood of $93 trillion. not based on logic or reason, just on the prevailing fashions in New York and San Francisco. That, Madam President, is what is defining today's Democrats.